Hello, and welcome to today's Trainer Education webinar, How to Build Emotional Intelligence for Individuals and Teams, the Top 7 Skills, hosted by HRDQ and presented by Marcia Hughes. Today's webinar will last approximately an hour. Do stay tuned at the conclusion of the session for an exclusive offer. Before we begin, note that there is a question, it may be called a chat box, it's usually located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You can use this section to send in any questions that you have, and then we'll either answer those throughout the webinar or at the end we will have time for a live Q&A with Marcia. And if we don't get to everyone's questions, we'll email those out to everyone at the end of the session. My name is Sarah Montgomery, and I will moderate today's webinar. I am in business development for HRDQ, a publisher of research-based training solutions that improve the performance of individuals, teams, and organizations. Our presenter today is Marcia Hughes. She is the president of Collaborative Growth and serves as a strategic communications partner for teams and their leaders. She presents her expertise in emotional intelligence through her consulting, keynote sessions, and program facilitation. Along with James Terrell, she is the co-author of the Team Emotional and Social Intelligence, which includes the Tessie Short, A Coach's Guide to Emotional Intelligence, The Emotionally Intelligent Team, and Emotional Intelligence in Action. Marcia is also the author of Life's 2% Solution. She is a certified trainer in the Bar on EQI and EQ 360 and provides train-the-trainer facilitation and coaching in powerful EQ delivery. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Marcia.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that lovely introduction, and most importantly, for the opportunity to be here with all of the good people who are interested in building emotional intelligence for our teams. I'm excited to be here and really want you to know that I'm very interested in your questions. I always love the format when we can see each other and just keep having back and forth conversations. This webinar is allowing us to get together around the world, but we don't get to have that back and forth quite as precisely as I wish. So write in your questions and we will respond to them. Let's go ahead and get going as we want to explore the top 7 skills for working with teams. And first, I want us to notice this quote from Dan Goleman. Dan is one of the most respected names in the entire field of emotional intelligence and has done tremendous work. And I love this quote because I think everyone I talk to now knows it's true. We're being judged by a new yardstick. And you can see the quote yourself. It's not just how smart we are. It really has to do with how we handle ourselves and each other. And this is true at the individual level, but it's even more true at the team level, and yet much more complex to do when we have a lot of people interacting. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do we manage to handle ourselves and each other at the team level. And as we do that, I'd first like to have a sense of who's here. So we're going to have a poll. Tell us about yourself and your primary work. Are you in human resources, OD, consulting? Is your primary work team building, or is it in some other area? And wow, we're getting lots of responses in quickly. Keep coming in and let us know, because then that helps me tailor what you have that's most interesting and really talk to those areas. And I'm seeing that there's just great variety the whole way through. And I'm sure many of you could have clicked more than one box if we had given you that option. Well, we're at the point where we have votes, and here's the results. We have quite a few people, as we can see, in human resources. OD, the most of all, is in other, and wouldn't it be interesting to know what that is? If anybody wants to send it in, you can let us know, but great diversity, and I appreciate that. That's excellent. And now we'll move back into our slides and notice that these are the top 7 skills that we're going to be discussing today. So these are team-based skills. There are many, many skills that have to do with emotional intelligence at the individual level. These are the 7 that you need when you pull it together from a team perspective. And we're going to talk about each one of them during today's webinar, so I won't go into them in detail here. First, though, let's talk a bit about what is emotional intelligence. And you'll often hear the phrase EI for emotional intelligence or EQ as an emotional quotient. And you can see that we've given it a definition as a field of inquiry where human beings are seeking to really access how we talk to each other and how we interact. So it's our communication and our behavioral skills. It's managing them at the individual level and then, of course, at the complexity of the team and group level. That's why it's really such a big part of our success in the workplace as well as in the rest of our life. And as we talk about this, I always like to talk about one of the areas that's most motivating to me, and this has to do with the emotional intelligence skill of optimism. Martin Seligman is a person that many of us know and really respect for his tremendous work with the American Psychological Association at the University of Pennsylvania and other places. What he's noticed, people in a good mood select higher goals, perform better, and persist longer at tasks. Now in our very complex world, where we're always seeking, it seems, to find out how to do more with less, even though that can seem terribly irritating at times, it does often seem to be what we're seeking to do. If we can be in a good mood instead of irritated because of the more with less, we can actually get more done. So let's notice good mood and teams and keep that as a part of what we keep in mind. Now what I've found is that a really significant part of adult learning is building in what I call the with them, and I bet many of you use that phrase too. What's in it for me? Whenever I'm talking to a big group of people, I often seek to say at the very first, you know, what's in it for you? Why are you here? What do you want to get out of this? Because, you know, if we don't help people really understand what's going on and what they can gain from it, why should they spend their time with it? Now I've added an extra T to this, what's in it for my team? So that's a question that we would all be asking as we look at it from the perspective of the team. Here's some research that we can spring from in answering this question. Dr. Reuven Bar-On began his work in emotional intelligence in the 1980s and has continued researching since then. Many other people have added to that rich research database. What he has found is the higher the EQ score, the more positive the prediction for success in coping with environmental demands and pressures, and in meeting our goals, our targets, whatever we're most motivated to achieve. So strength in this area is directly correlated with strength and success in the business world as well as in our personal world. Okay, so, well then what's team emotional intelligence? What do we add to it from what we just talked about a minute ago when I was talking about emotional intelligence as having a part of communication and behaviors with one another? Really, I'd say it's taking it up a notch. First, we all are individuals at the team, and we need to deal with our own individual emotional and social intelligence. We do that by understanding and managing our own emotions. Then we make it more complex because we take the time and we learn how to understand, to recognize, respond well to the emotional database we receive from other people. And part of this, and this is the social part, includes understanding those that we engage with from a big picture perspective. So what's really going on here? What are people seeking to accomplish or to say to us? We know that so much of communication is nonverbal. So how do we understand that communication? How do we really build it into the rich context that can be available as we work with one another? And what happens if we don't? And this is one of the answers that can happen. It's derailment. This springs from research that's been done by the Center for Creative Leadership. It's on derailment. What is most likely to cause leaders to derail? So now when we're talking about leaders in this sense, we might be talking about the leader of the team, or we might be talking about a team that's made up of leaders, all of whom are members of the team. And you can see these 3 points here, one of which is directly related, not being able to work well in a team. If you can't work well in a team, do you think you could lead a team well? I don't think so. I really think that leadership for team really requires being able to be a good team member as well. And that's going to include the EI skill of humility, one that is sometimes hard for people to work with. So I think that, you know, it's a very important area for us to pay attention to and bring to mind how we're doing at working with teams. Are we successful ourselves and in working with good interpersonal relationships? So here's a chance now for us to learn just a little bit more about you and for me to have a sense, what's your background in emotional intelligence? How much do you work with it? So we're going to open this poll now and see if your background happens to be none or some, quite a bit, or are you a real pro in the area? And certainly all of that is possible answers. And as we keep going forward, we're seeing quite a few people responding here, and we're just about at closure. Yes, we've got responses from everyone here. And again, quite a bit of a mix with over half people saying some. And I'm not surprised to see that. I am delighted to see it, that's for sure. Because with that real strength, it seems like emotional intelligence is something that has become quite normalized in our world. And we're really working with in quite a bit of depth in many places. But if you've only had a little bit of exposure, hopefully today's work can really help you understand how to apply it also at a team level. So I'm grateful for all of you who are here with your variety of different backgrounds. And we'll move forward now into the next slide, which will help us understand, there we go, the 5 objectives we're going to work on today. So the slides are organized in our discussion to accomplish some discussion with regard to each of these 5 areas, which of course includes very much a focus on the 7 core behaviors. And with that, we also want to know, how do we rapidly generate candid team conversations, get people to talk with one another and tell the truth, of course with compassion, not the truth in any brutal way. How do we use our EI skills to get both the individuals as well as the whole team to buy in? And then when we talk about moving in 3 directions, we're talking about moving toward, away from, or against, and we'll talk about that a bit. And then let me ask you, what do you think the biggest challenge is to productive teamwork? Love to hear some of your feedback on that as a part of the questions that we can take in at the end of our conversation today. So, Objective 1, identify and develop the core behaviors that we need for teams. And here's the best way of understanding it. That's by looking at the team model. This model is the model that's behind the research, and it really demonstrates the result that teams gain when they work with the TESI assessment that Christine mentioned at the beginning, or excuse me, that was Sarah mentioned at the beginning, and it's Team Emotional and Social Intelligence Survey. And the survey itself will look at these 7 skills that you see in the outer area: emotional awareness, team identity, communication, etc. And then when people start working together well as a team and they move away from being individuals and more towards being a group, they're able to move into accomplishing trust. We'll have so many people who at times will even say, come in and I'll give you an hour and build trust in my team. Well, it can't happen, can it? We get trust as an outcome, as something that's a result because people have worked hard in communicating honestly and reliably for a time with each other. So trust, empathy, better decisions are very much a constant goal, and loyalty result when we use these 7 behaviors, which finally takes us to the goal every organization has: sustainable productivity from their teams, which comes when the teams are feeling emotional and social well-being. So let's look at how do they get there. The first core skill that we're going to talk about is team identity. Now first, do notice that in this graph that we have of the 7 skills, they're presented in a circle. And that's because, as we know, every one of these skills does influence the other skills as well. So team identity never operates on its own. It's going to have an influence on mood and the ability to resolve conflict. But it also has its own context, its own strength that it adds to a team. This is the place where you're going to find some of the basic context that you would often expect within a team, clarification for roles and responsibilities, being able to understand also belongingness. And one good way, if your team members were going out and having lunch with someone else not on the team, would they ever brag about your team? Would they ever tell people, wow, I'm on the IT team and I love it, it's really interesting because? Do they even know the name of the team? You know, so all of those can have some element that have to do with belongingness and with identity. Now what we find with that sense of belongingness is a sense of pride that starts developing. And that gets us to really that very first quote from Seligman that I was talking about, where I mentioned people in a good mood are going to be more successful, they're going to accomplish more, they're going to hang in there longer. That belongingness helps support the good mood because it gets that sense of mutual buy-in, which is really quite exciting result. Now, how do you build identity if a team doesn't have it? Well, what if you took some time and really worked on even the mission and vision statement can make a big difference with that. And sometimes we've done playful things too. We've come into a room and we've had the team there and we've had pipe cleaners and magic markers and all kinds of colors of paper, whatever, and we'll have them develop their own logo and brand and just play with it and be playful. But out of that, they end up coming up with a sense of, hey, this is who we are and this is why I'm glad I'm part of this team. You can understand, I know, that if people are glad to be a part of the team, if they brag about it, you're already well on your way to success. And certainly well on your way to motivation. Motivation. Critical for a team deciding that they're actually going to work together to get things done and not just be a set of individuals sitting around a table who may from time to time decide to talk to one another and work together and share their knowledge and their processes. How do we build the kind of motivation that causes people to want to share? That's really one of our core questions behind the motivation. And there's a lot of work in the field of motivation. One that I particularly appreciate is the work by Daniel Pink, who's written Drive and other books. And he really talks about in motivation people have to have some autonomy. That means the ability to operate individually. And so we need to look at that juxtaposition at a team level. How do members of the team have some autonomy so that they have a sense of how do I work on my own so I can feel successful, and then how do I also work with the others on the team. We can also take that construct up a notch and look at autonomy for the team as a whole. Is the organization giving the team autonomy to be successful? Other components that Dan Pink has talked about from motivation include the resources, so the ability to become proficient, to be good at something, and then a purpose. And that purpose is something we're really going to see around this whole chart. If we have a high driving purpose that says, yes, this is why I want to do this work, then we're more motivated. We're more likely to want to do the work. Motivation happens to come from the same root word as emotional intelligence, or as emotion anyway, and that is emovere. Emovere, a Latin word that means to move. So to move is also a part of motivation. Our next one is emotional awareness. And quite frankly, when we were creating this scale and working with it, I thought this is the one we're going to get pushback. When we take this to teams, they're sometimes going to be saying to us, I'm not so sure, that sounds airy-fairy. We're never finding that. It just doesn't seem to happen. Rather, what is happening is that people are saying, oh yes, that's body language, and that's all the ways we communicate when we're not talking to each other or other than words. So I think the awareness of the value of paying attention to these other forms of communication is something that's really expanding in our workforce. We want to be sure that we take advantage of that knowledge, that increased awareness, and help teams be able to improve their awareness with one another. So how can we do this? Well, sometimes you can do it by just, for example, having a breakout in a team where you have people just get together in pairs and talk with each other about something important to them, just for a few minutes, and then come back. But then noticing, what did this person tell you? Did you take time to get engaged with them? We do have many resources, by the way, that list activities that you can use with teams to help them build all of these 7 skills. I'll go through just some fairly easy ones, but even more complex and sometimes more challenging ones are available in our resource list. So this emotional awareness is always going to be a part of team motivation, because if we aren't paying attention to one another, we're operating as individuals, and that's a challenge to a team success. Our next skill is communication. And my suspicion is if I could see all of you and have you raise your hands, and I asked you this question, you would all raise your hands. And here's the question. Have you ever gone to a team and asked them what their biggest challenge is? What do they say? If they said communication, raise your hands. Yep, and I'll bet you that most of you have in some way or another virtually raised your hands there. Teams will often self-diagnose as the issue that we have as a team, that what's getting in the way of our success is communication. I think what that means, though, is they've lumped all of these different skills under that one topic. And they've ended up making that topic so darn big that it almost doesn't make any sense. It's too big. It's too much. So we can really end up with a challenge because we're not really sure what we're talking about. In this construct, when we're talking about communication, we're talking about a sender and a receiver. The sender says X and the receiver hears X, or at least something close to X. Effective communication at the team level builds in the patience and taking the time to check in with one another to find out, did you ask me to do this project? Is this what am I on the right track? To really be able to encourage participation and discuss sensitive matters. For a team leader, sometimes this means also managing the environment so those who are more introverted have an opportunity to speak, to balance kind of the participation by different groups. It can make quite a bit of difference. We also talk about the probability that there are going to be some times when a team can be so good at a skill that there actually is some level of cost of being high. And by cost of being high, what I mean is they may be so strong in this that they actually are overpowering some of the other components of the team or the team skills that need to show up as well. For example, what if we have a senior team and it's made up of people from IT and from HR and from the overall production team, part of the organization. So you've got representatives, it's a senior team from different sectors within the organization. If one sector in that team is particularly good at communication, they may well overshadow the others, and the others may not get as much attention, may not speak as well, may not get noticed as much. They may have a lot to say, but they're just not going to speak up as actively, would be a better way of saying that then as well. For example, let's say the HR team might be much more talkative than the IT team. Wouldn't be hard to imagine that happening. So does the IT team get overshadowed. So we need to look at the cost of being high as well as the strengths that we need to dial up and to make good and strong. Okay, and then the skill of stress tolerance. Now, can you imagine how the skill of stress tolerance might be too high for a team? I'll bet some of you can come up with the theory on how that can happen. Overall, it's a tremendously important skill, and what we're talking about is the team being able to manage the pressures of the workload, of time constraints. I mentioned at the beginning of our webinar the construct that happens when we keep being asked to do more with less, and that can build so much stress. What happens if your team is measured and measured and measured? Are they getting successful, or are they just paying attention to the measurements after a while? What's happening to the stress? So low stress tolerance can be a considerable issue, and it can mean that one person's stress starts building on another person's stress and really has some significant consequences in that manner. What we've found when there's a cost of being high has been that sometimes teams are really good at stress, and they tell the organization leadership, hey, listen, we're the bring it on team. Give us the stress topics. Give us the tough stuff. We'll do it for you. And a couple negative consequences can happen from that. One can be that they spend so much time doing this kind of work that they start burning out themselves, and people start looking for a different job and to move on. And so you lose that high capacity team. The other part might be that the organization starts giving the creative and most interesting tasks to that particular team. They are not developing the other teams as much, which means that overall as an organization they're not as strong. In addition, the other teams may well start getting jealous and become demotivated out of the process. So we need to look at a balance for stress. The other thing can happen if a team ends up in low stress, moving back to that component of the concept, is that people start becoming much more individually oriented. They'll start taking care of their own needs a whole lot more than paying attention to the needs of everyone around the table and seeking to balance it out. It's just kind of a survival strategy. So that's why we need to be sure we have good, solid capabilities in stress tolerance, but we don't want to take it so high that it becomes disproportional. So how do we increase a team's skills in stress tolerance? You know, sometimes as summer's coming on, it might mean you go out for an ice cream cone. You know, you do something fun for the team. Just a little bit of time sometimes can make such a difference. Or do something fun. Maybe have everybody on the team watch a common movie and then talk about it afterwards. What did that movie teach us about our team? What was interesting about it? What can we take away from it that would help us be a better team? And you know, just getting the popcorn and watching a movie, it's just a different way of doing things for a while. Changing things out, making the atmosphere more relaxed can really make a difference for some of that stress tolerance. If your organization has the ability to give people a little bit of time off, that always is certainly a popular strategy too. But you can find many ways, even when you don't have that, to just take a few minutes and have fun. Be sure that fun as well as productivity has some component in your team meetings. That'll help manage the stress as well. All right, conflict resolution. This is often the biggest issue that teams have, and quite frankly, when teams are measuring themselves in the TESI, that's the assessment that HRDQ will be talking with you about, the Team Emotional and Social Intelligence Survey, they find that where they have the biggest challenge is conflict resolution. And I don't think any of us are surprised really when we think about it. It's just much more complex activity. To be good in conflict resolution, we have to be able to not only know what our concerns are and be willing to advocate and speak up for them, but we also need to be able to listen to differences of opinion, differences of how the world is interpreted. And listening for those differences can be pretty darn challenging. It can be difficult to develop that skill. So what I would recommend is if you notice a team that's having a lot of trouble with conflict resolution, first start with finding out, you know, how are they doing at listening to one another? And you might even sometimes stop and just say, hey, Betty, what did Jose just say? And see if you can get Betty to repeat, you know, the gist of what Jose said. So you're teaching them to take a few minutes to stop and listen to each other. So active listening, of course, is going to be a skill that we see show up under communication, but it also is going to be a critical part of conflict resolution. We did quite a bit of research with the TESI to find out what was happening, given that teams were, in fact, rating themselves often lower in conflict resolution than other areas. And what we found is that this skill requires so much more ability to listen to other people, that that's a key part of that challenge. And so building that skill, taking time to literally slow things down enough to find out, are we heard? Are we feeling good about being heard? Are we feeling that that part was completed successfully? Often, you know, if you get on the same page, finding the resolution to the problem is not nearly so hard. The biggest challenge of all is literally getting everybody to that same page. And I know that there's just a tremendous number of wonderful ideas that people are putting up in the question and answer area, and I wish that I could be just working at that, but I did see one that says emotional mirroring, the interlinking of the limbic systems, can be an important part of what we can work on here. And actually, you know, I see that emotional mirroring as something that could impact several of these skills around this, this whole circle of the 7 different skills. And the emotional mirroring needs to be done in a way that's always respectful, that's letting someone know, hey, I'm picking up some joy from you. You're really excited about this project. Or I'm picking up some worry from you. What's up? You know, just some way of being able to respond and be in interaction with each other. There's a lot of strategies for building conflict resolution, and it really can happen at a team level. But again, I want to emphasize, if people feel like they care about each other, the problem is usually not as hard. One of the best resources, by the way, I've ever found in this area is the book Getting to Yes by Fisher and Urey, part of the negotiation project from Harvard University. One of those delightful books that's about 100 pages long and full of some great skills. One of the key things is separating the person from the problem. So I'm able to listen to you and treat you with respect while I disagree on how you would solve that problem. And that's what gets us to creativity. And quite frankly is going to get us to the positive mood as well. The positive mood that we can find as we're looking around the table, as we're experiencing our interaction as a team. We find this often to be at the heart of a can-do attitude. It's a lot about how we get energy to take on those tough tasks and the energy to find out that we're actually much more creative, maybe as a team, than we thought we were. So there's a lot more opportunity to start finding new answers to some of the challenges that have been there and to build new interest. Now, positive mood is often the skill that teams will rate themselves the strongest in. This is particularly true if a team has a purpose that they really can get behind. So if they believe in what they're doing in some kind of way, and that can happen whether people are in healthcare, there's certainly many reasons to believe in that. If they're producing a product, some product that people are going to be purchasing in a store, do they feel good about that product? What feels great about it? How is this important as my piece in the world? When we can get that, the positive mood is strong. I will tell you that if your team has rated themselves low in all 7 areas, that either positive mood or motivation could be a really good place to start, because those are less complex skills overall, and so you want to start with something that they've got the highest probability of moving towards success with. Getting that sense of success, they can then move on to some of the other more complex skills. Okay, so that was our 7 skills. Now we're going to put them into some of the application with questions here. Generating candid team conversations. We look to do this in part by using the TESI, and that's the assessment that Sarah will be telling us about in just a little bit that HRDQ has available. And the TESI is a situation in which you can generate a team internal 360. Team members answer questions themselves that then get them a result of how are we doing from our team perspective in each of the 7 areas we just discussed. Put that result in front of your team, and there is no doubt there will be some candid conversation. The results came from the team and are going to the team, so the buy-in is very, very high. There's very strong face validity because it's their data about themselves. So then we take it into, well, what are we saying to each other? People have answered questions confidentially in a way that now gives them the chance to really do some big picture looking or bigger picture looking as we look at those 7 different skill areas and really bring them to life and say, well, how is it that we're resolving conflict? What's an example of when we did it well? What's an example of when we did it poorly? And we'd really like to change in a different way and maybe use some of those good strategies when we did it well. If a team is not conscious of how they're doing this work, helping them become conscious and have those candid conversations makes quite a big difference. So let's talk about how do we handle emotions in our workplace. These are 3 questions, that's the first of the 3 as you'll see on this slide, that help us get a sense of how to really build a team into some candid conversation pathways. If you ask them, give them a piece of paper that has maybe these 3 questions or questions similar to this, whatever works for you, but we'll work with these 3 for now, on the page, and just have them write for a few minutes on their own. How do we handle emotions? What are we doing with it? Is it okay to have emotions? Well, heck, if we want to have passion for our work, it better be okay to have emotions, because passion is certainly emotion. What happens if somebody gets upset? How strong are we at being able to handle that? What do we do when it happens? Do we have permission to give each other candid feedback? Do we know how to do it in a way that's respectful, that has compassion as a component of the candid feedback so that it's actually taken to be said and presented in a way that's quite useful for us as individuals as well as all of us as a team? That question, how do we handle emotions in our workplace, is a very concrete question and can bring up quite a bit of interesting discussion. Now, the next one, how does our team handle emotions? So instead of just how do we, which might be, well, Mary and Joe pretty well do it well, but Tina and, let's see, Roger have a challenge with it. What happens then? Now we're taking it to the team. For all of us as the production team at this company, how are we doing with our emotions? Do we just keep trying to produce our product, or do we ever stop? Do we ever notice, wait a minute, something's really getting in the way here. I think we need to take something new on and just really take a breath, take some time, talk about these emotions and work through it, and then get back to our job and do it even better. And how about this? How do we demonstrate leadership courage? And particularly if we define leadership as a skill that everyone on the team needs. We're all influencing each other and our results. So in that sense, we're all bringing leadership to the table. So when we're all bringing that leadership to the table, are we courageous about it? Are we sensitive about it? What does courage mean? It often means being willing to speak up in a time when it's fairly difficult to do so. When we're a little bit concerned that we may not be completely trained in how to raise this issue, but it feels very important to do. I think one of the most important parts about using courage, especially if we're concerned about what the impact of the comments might be for others, is to find a way to express some empathy. I know that you really care about this project, and I'm delighted that you do. I do as well. And so I was wondering if we could talk about what's going wrong with da-da-da, or my perception that things are going wrong here, whatever. I think it's so important. Keep it true. Raise the question, but you can always do it with a way that starts with some level of affirmation. I'm talking to you about this because you are a part of the team, and that matters. That can be a great way to bring in the courage. Okay, this research from Dr. Effelbein is such an important point. The ability to understand one another's emotional expressions explained 40% of the variance in team performance. 40%. So back to remembering those 7 skills in the circle that we looked at earlier, one of them is emotional awareness. And I mentioned that it was possible that teams would just say, well, that's kind of airy-fairy, we don't want to bother with it. If I ever get anything close to that kind of feedback from people, I, of course, first want to acknowledge that that's their sense of it, but then help them get some other learning. Show them what Dr. Effelbein's research, 40% of the variance in team performance. Now, if you really step back and remember, I would bet many of you have heard the research on communication that says that the actual word, just a word, has about 7% communication. So if you look at an email, and let's say at least it's typed normally, it doesn't have colors and caps and all those kinds of things, but it's just a typed normally email, you've got about 7% communication there. And yet most people in the world seem to be communicating with emails. Therein lies a problem, and certainly for teams. When we take that higher, just being able to have a voicemail instead of an email adds a great deal of additional information with the tonality, the inflection that's used, etc. And then, of course, when we're in person, we have all the various different submodalities that come alive and that we have the ability to learn and recognize from one another. But the question is, have we activated that ability? Are we taking time to notice this level of communication from one another? I feel certain that any team that's really, really good, and I've been using production teams as an example, so let's look at that, really good at production, is going to be good at paying attention to those emotional expressions from one another. The emotional expressions as a subcontext of all of the modalities that we're expressing from, that some people would call our nonverbal communication. All right, our third objective, use emotional intelligence skills to integrate individual goals into team goals and therefore building that buy-in. So let's say somebody says, I want more meaningful work. Maybe they like their job at first, but by now it's beginning to feel a little boring or dull or something. What might we do to help them get more meaningful work? You know, is the work, we could have a group discussion about it. We could talk about what could we do? Can we change up some of our processes? You know, one of the great examples that's often given is that Google gives people at their company time, team members, to have a creative day. They get time when they literally get to be creative, and it's fine to fail, whatever fail means. They don't have to actually be successful in their new creative endeavor. They're going to share the results of that creativity with one another. This is what I experimented with. This is what I learned. Sometimes one of the best ways, if someone says I want more meaningful work, is to create kind of an open space and give people a chance to talk with one another, to explore, well, what else might we do then? What would be different that made this more meaningful? And sometimes it's literally tweaking the way we talk to each other. Sometimes it might be adding a stretch goal to our work as a team to get things done more successfully. There are many different ways, and sometimes teams take a day off and go contribute the day as a whole team to Habitat for Humanity or to some other community project. And in ways that helps build that sense of meaning too. So there are a lot of different ways of working with that term meaningful. The team itself could really explore that and help make it more successful. Questions that could be asked are listed on the slide, and I'm sure you have many others that we could ask as a part of this. So overall, what we want to do is be aware of strengths as well as weaknesses, or I prefer often to talk about challenges at both the individual and the team levels. When we work with teams, we'll often give them an individual assessment as well as the team assessment. But it's also fine to work with them as a team without doing the separate individual skill as an assessment. But we're going to need to be aware that we're talking to individuals as well as to a collective team. And they're more likely to go to the individual level at the beginning of forming the team, and certainly anytime there is high stress. So how do we help meet one another's goals as well as our collective goal is a very important part of bringing that communication together successfully. We want to communicate to motivate. Now that's a nice pithy little statement, but really it does say a great deal. Motivation, remember, that's about moving. How do we want people to move? Do we want them to buy in, to have some passion, some excitement, some sense of humor about what we're doing? Certainly have a sense of permission to exercise their creativity. So communicate to motivate. And if we remember, if I say this to someone the way I'm thinking about expressing it, will that cause the person to feel more or less motivated? Now that's a good question to ask, especially if you're feeling a little wondering, a little questioning. Would this be good to bring forward, or should I hold back from my team member and not say it this way? Ask yourself, will it motivate the person? Will it help us move to yes, or am I doing this just because I want to be right? One of the questions I love to ask people is, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? And if we circle back to that original quote I had from Martin Seligman, happy people are going to be more productive. So therein lies a tie. You know, let's help people feel motivated by being happy to be there to do the work, leveraging the positive mood. Okay, now I've been talking about motivation in many different ways, and here's a way that we've found to be quite powerful. In essence, we find that people move in 3 different directions. They move toward things, and I'll give you an example. I am going to move toward the opportunity to see some of your questions and be able to answer them, because I love to have interaction and dialogue. That's something that's fun for me. I would move against, that means something I really don't like. So if I saw one team member being overtly disrespectful to another team member, there's a good shot that I might intervene. Just step in and say, hey, could I help? Do something to change that energy that was looking too negative, needed some assistance. Move away from is the kind of motion that happens when people kind of pull back their chairs. It's like, all right, they're going through this dialogue again. I've heard it a jillion times. I'm bored. I'll start working on my grocery list or my product list for something else or whatever, you know. So we begin to really shift in some kind of way, shift our attention away from the engagement that otherwise would be available for us. So you can notice with each of these 7 skills as you're working with your team, are we activating something that's getting them engaged, that they're moving toward, that they want to do? Is it something they're moving against? They really, really don't like this, or actually even away from. And away from is one that I really encourage you to notice. If you start finding that people are trying to sneakily do text or whatever else, you know how that happens, or seem to just be disengaging, that's a move away kind of information. Then if you're running that team meeting, if you're the team leader or running that particular discussion, it could be good to stop and check in with folks. What's going on? What's causing this? Why are you drifting away? Because their attention is going to be much more successful when you move toward that. Okay, so what is the biggest challenge to effective teamwork? Interesting question, and I would love to see what all of you are saying, and we do have several different comments coming in. The biggest challenge to effective teamwork. Now what we would say is it's the failure to listen and understand how to act together. Now that might be kind of a tricky response because there's several components to that. Failure to listen is the first component. Are we listening to one another? Are we paying attention? Are we noticing what's coming up? Are we understanding? So what if I know that somebody just said something, but I really don't know what they're talking about? Then am I willing to use my assertiveness, my engagement to say, hey, Theodore, I don't understand. What are you really seeking to say here because I'm not able to respond well? Help me, would you? So that's being proactive and taking responsibility. It's my job to be sure that I work on understanding. This is something we're working on at a team level. And then how do we act together? So together we listen well enough to find out that we're all on the same page in terms of what we're talking about. We understand the different perspectives, or we understand the technical or other related data that we need to work on our actions so that we can then act as a cohesive whole. This is one of the simplest sentences to say and one of the hardest to do. What we're finding is that most people in the world are doing their work through teams. Very little work anymore gets done absolutely solo. It's really a team world. As a matter of fact, I've talked with some monks who are up at a monastery near Snowmass, Colorado, and they talk about how hard they need to work. There are 5 people in that monastery many times, but how hard they're working to understand what the 5 of them are doing together to run their facility. So we can even be a monk up in the mountains and still need to learn to listen and understand how to act together. So as we do this, teams move together with what we call collaborative intelligence. And to me, this is the exciting new possibility in the world. It's really got quite a bit of energy behind it, collaborative intelligence. Emotional intelligence is very important, but collaborative intelligence is an entirely new level. And you know, collaboration is going to include, it's a composite skill, isn't it, that brings together many, many of our other skills that come together when we have built team identity, when we're taking time to build a purposeful engagement and have a positive mood, when we've learned how to really turn conflict into one of the most creative of all of our engagements, because we realize there's different ideas here, and that is very, very successful for us because we don't all want to have the same thought. When we learn how to communicate and we can slow down enough instead of staying in the habit of just getting things done, checking one more thing off my list. So we take time to listen to one another and to really actively engage. We take time to build motivation and to deal with stress, which may mean that collaborative intelligence includes playing, and I'm certain it does. I'm sure if I had a chance to ask all of you to raise your hands, you'd have many ideas of good ways for teams to play together and how that really does strengthen real team time. I think a group that only is task-oriented and never plays is much more likely to be a group than a team. And sometimes people get caught in that construct of what's the difference between a team and a group. And part of it's that emotional buy-in. We know we have something in it together. We've got something at stake that it takes our mutual cooperation and problem solving to be able to accomplish. And I see that one of the comments is that time is a huge concern, as well as used as an excuse, and that came from Kristen. Thank you for that, Kristen. That's true, that people will say, well, I just don't have time to listen to you. And, you know, I chuckle as I say it, but I'm sure that I've been guilty of that same feeling myself sometimes. I've got to get this job done. But maybe at that point, I'm really using it as an excuse. Because really often if we'll slow down and find out what's actually the issue that we're to resolve, what's the challenge that we're seeking to really create, to address and create a response to, what's going on, if we take that initial time, it pays off enormously. But it's difficult to bring it up sometimes and to get people to slow down. As a team leader, for many of you out there who are or who are coaching team leaders, getting them to get the team to slow down and often for themselves to slow down could be one of your most artful and important accomplishments. So, organizational action. How are you going to work at this from your whole organizational perspective? What we would suggest is always remember to acknowledge. As soon as you can catch somebody doing right, do it. Take time to express gratitude. That is one of the key strategies Martin Seligman has in the works that he has given. And I know I've referenced him often, and it's because I do hold him in such respect at helping us have that core motivation it takes to being successful as a team. Gratitude is a core emotion that will build happiness, and that builds the energy to maybe slow down and ultimately get more work done. Taking the time to talk to one another. Treating one another with respect in every way we possibly can. And that takes us to looking at Michael Jordan. Michael, if you can't pass, you can't play. That is a comment made by Coach Dean Smith to Michael Jordan his freshman year at school. Well, we know how that story goes. With 5,633 career assists, over 32,000 points scored, Michael Jeffrey Jordan not only learned to pass, he and the Chicago Bulls learned a lot about teamwork. And we can learn that same kind of teamwork and take it to exceptional performance and sustainable value for our teams. And Sarah, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Marcia. Sorry about that. My mute button got stuck here. Good. So let's send in some of those questions. As Marcia has been mentioning, we have great participation today on the line. So several have already come in. But go ahead and continue to send in those questions. While we're waiting for additional questions to come in, I do want to review through with the team emotional and social intelligence, which Marcia has mentioned and is the foundation of her session today. This program provides a thorough and engaging training session for participants to develop the 7 skills that were reviewed today. For joining us, you can review the facilitator set for an exclusive 40% off for 30 days risk-free. The set contains the tools, guidelines, and scripts for producing an effective full or half-day workshop. And then you also get a sample participant survey and a workbook, as well as a classroom PowerPoint presentation and a team model poster included as well. You want to use the coupon code, it's webinar TESI, T-E-S-I, at HRDQstore.com, and that's good through May 30th. Okay, so we do have several questions that are coming in. Let's go ahead and get started with this one here from Michelle. Michelle asks, how do we manage cliques in teams?
Oh boy, that's such a good question, and it does happen. You know, teams can have subgroups, and that can be healthy. because they're people who maybe you're working together particularly on a component of a project. But when it turns into cliques, once people use that word, it usually means only those three people go to lunch together and they never want anybody else, or they're literally whispering to each other in the middle of a team meeting, etc. We're aware of what happens with that kind of clique behavior. It can be so demotivating. There are a lot of different ways of responding to it. I think it has to start with noticing it. And it may mean at a whole team meeting, you first say in front of the room, that would be the team leader or a facilitator if you were working with the team in that capacity, we need to work together as a whole. And some of you may feel a lot closer to one another than other folks, but for purposes of our work as a team, we're asking you to start really paying attention to how to come together as a whole. So some conversation of that nature. It also can be very useful to meet with the clique separately, and if you have several cliques, then meet with each clique, but do them separately and have some conversation about what does it mean and how can we become a whole team. And then there are exercises that you can do to get the whole team together, or maybe they can end up making a commitment that we're not going to talk about each other. We are going to talk together. Do you have other questions?
We do, yes. We have a few people who are asking things around kind of the virtual environment around teaming. Bob specifically asks, what do we do when our team members are not in the same location?
That is today's question, isn't it? And it's certainly going to be happening more and more. I've done a separate webinar on that, and I would be glad to tell people if you send me an email to tell you about that, or send it to Sarah and she can help me know, and I'll let you know. I think one of the first things is you need to emphasize even more what the engagement rules are with each other. Be sure that everyone knows what are we expecting of one another when we do come together. Have frequent, I would say, webinars or some kind of live meeting so that you can have the video on. The video will make a big difference in people seeing each other and building a sense of engagement. If at all possible, when they first get together, have a meeting when they are together in person and they get a chance to build some ways of understanding each other and then work on it from there. So those are some of the first tips, but let me tell you, it is harder to be a virtual team leader than to have people who are right there in front of you. So be sure that all of that does get worked with.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I don't know, Marcia, if you can see Jane's question here, but Jane lists in a very interesting question around changing teams. So it sounds like in her organization, teams change around a lot. They're not staying intact for very long. And so one idea that she's offering is kind of that suggestion of how do you then, work on that team emotional intelligence if that intact team is not staying around for very long. They're swapping out, people pretty frequently.
Well, Jane, I appreciate your question. It's a very good, very astute question. And with all of these, we all need to pitch in together to come up with answers. Let me respect that you have a great deal to offer, I'm sure, in coming up with some ideas. I would say, number one, talk to management about the chance that this is actually having a cost at being turned over so often, if there's an invitation to have that conversation. So since you know right now we may not get to be together really long, maybe you can, even as a team, just create some fun interaction quickly. So let's all go out and have pizza. It's nice to have pizza brought in and we can sit around and talk, but if you can possibly go out together and just do something social at the beginning to build the impact of being together. So you can say, we're going to take advantage of this. We're taking charge. For the time that we work together, let's have fun. That would be one of many possible suggestions to this wonderfully complex question.
Mm-hmm. And we have, Marcia, we have a few people asking specifically about the TESI instrument and how that kind of works. Zena asks, does the TESI measure the whole team at one time, or does it measure each individual team member?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you, and what a good one for us to talk about. You can see on the screen that there's the green copy, the brighter green that says TESI short, and the assessment that HRDQ has available is the TESI short, and team members rate the team. So the questions are we questions. So we take time to resolve conflict. We support one another in work-life balance. That's an example of some of the questions. Most assessments in our world are I questions. I like my team, or I can talk to my team members, or whatever. These are we questions. And so then they're compiled together to end up finding a team average.
Okay, great. Good. Well, thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you, everyone who has joined us today. Feel free to send in more of your questions. If we did not get a chance to answer them, and there are several in here, Marcia will actually respond to all of those in writing, and those will get emailed out to everyone early next week. So you'll see all of the questions that came in as well as Marcia's responses. Thank you so much, and we appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative.
Thank you, Sarah.